Hi, welcome back to another TerranScapes video. This video shows the desert rivers that I recently completed for a very large board set. That video has been posted, so you can go and see that video to see the entire board set laid out. But I wanted to, as I mentioned in that video, break up the different types of boards into their own video segments. So I thought for this segment we'll take a look at the river boards, and I'll show you a little bit about what I did. Before we take a look at them, however, I'm going to show you a couple pictures I found on the web looking at some desert rivers that I kind of drew some inspiration from when I designed these. So this is one of the straight river boards, and what I've done is I've tried to take into that account of the way desert rivers will sort of serpentine over a soft sand substrate. As it dries out, it cuts little smaller channels as it meanders through. So I tried to go for that effect. And the other thing I wanted to try to capture was that sometimes there's little opportunistic plants that will grow alongside the waterway, and I was thinking of something that's quick growing and capitalizes on the just the moisture that's there and possibly dies out when there's a flood, and then whatever seeds get washed down in the water and resprout, something like that. But then I took a couple moments to think about maybe putting in some special vegetation spots where there's sort of an outcropping of sand. You'll see that a little more predominantly in the Bend River sections, but where it's got a couple unique foliage bits. We'll show that up close in a second. And then I also went along and put in reeds at various spots along the river. Now, in the past, I've used Woodland Scenic's grass. I forget what the proper name is, but it's a very fine texture, and so I wanted to go with something a little more substantial. I feel like this represents the scale of reeds a little bit better, and so that was my thinking. So here you can see a closer shot of the river. It has been coated with Mod Podge to give it a little bit of texture, but that is one of the softer compounds, but it really is the only one I have that does that really nice soft undulations, which is really what I wanted for the river section, as it's sort of, to me, very slow cascading. But because it's in this recess in the channel, I don't expect it to have many things sitting on it, so it should resist impressions pretty well just by virtue of its location. So you can see here the reeds that I've put in, the clumps, and I push them back a little bit from the water, thinking that when the river's a little higher they grow, and then as it shrinks they're sort of left high and dry. This is a sisal fiber, which I think it looks, again, much more to scale for a dried reed than the Woodland Scenic's grass, so I was very pleased with how that came out. And then over here you can see that little clump of vegetation that I mentioned. I recently picked up this, they call it sage color, super turf from Scenic Express, and I thought it'd be nice to have a unique species just in the riverway, something that can only exist whatever in this channel or along this river. So this is the only place you'll see that particular color showing up, but then I did put in some of the more vegetation that are shown elsewhere on the set included in that spot as well. But I kind of pushed them up on the sandbar as really they can't, thinking that it's not a water loving a hydrophilic species collection, so that's why they're sort of pushed up away from the river. And then again, I've dropped in some little bits along the riverway, sisal fiber, to get out of there, to anyway, to dress up against the water itself and to give it something a little bit more unique than some of the other water features in the set. I think they really give it a little bit of a pop along the river, and I think they work pretty well. So anyway, that was the thought with the design of the river overall, and we should probably take a look at another one to see how that continues. And so here's another straight, just to give a sense of how the same style board might vary slightly. So again, put in that clump of vegetation, push it up on the sort of sandbar on the sides. Where there's a curve, even on the straights, I put in a little bit of raised sand area there to kind of capture the feel that when as water flows around a curve, it deposits sand on the inside of the curve. And then I've thrown in a couple scattering of rocks and, along some of the islands, dropped in a little vegetation just to kind of break it up and give a little bit more realism. And here is one of the bends. So this is a bend right, as it, I have the opening here at the bottom, and then I determine which direction it's bending at the top. So anyway, just to give you another sense, now this one, I did incorporate just a couple rocks scattered throughout the river set, and choosing the color for them was a little bit tricky. I didn't want to have them be too far off the general color scheme of the boards, but I wanted them to stand out a little bit, so giving them a very slight gray hue sets them apart just a little bit without it looking too out of place with the sort of topography of the land. And the other thing I forgot to mention at this point is that for the carving of the sides here, normally in the past I've finished it pretty much just by painting it the way I paint all the other surfaces, but because this is such a bright set and it didn't really have a very strong contrast, so I went in and shaded all of the cut areas and then dry brushed them back up. And it just gives them a little bit more contrast. It's not overly powerful, but I didn't want it to be that strong, and I think it does set that apart just a little bit. And it sort of satisfied me in terms of creating a way for it to stand out a little bit from the normal sandy surface on the top. So that gives you a sense of the bend. And so here's a 10 by 10 board, and this is the river end cap. And so basically it's just been carved with the idea that the water is flowing somewhere underground. Otherwise it's finished in a very similar scheme to the others. One of the things that I enjoyed sort of working with was creating some variety in the depth of the width of the river as it flows. Oh, and I forgot to mention, so we should come up for a nice close look on that. What I did for the rivers is I left that pretty much transparent. I tinted them just a little bit to set them apart from, not looking like it's perfectly clear water. And I did do a little shading within the channel itself to give it a sort of wet look. When soils are wet, they're a little bit darker. And when I carved these, they weren't exactly as deep as I thought they needed to be, so there's a little overflow in some areas. So some of the highlighted areas, still were underwater, but, it still works pretty well, I think, and it's something that I probably can improve a little bit in the future. But that gives you a little idea of the ripple effect on the water. I think that came out really nice and has just the right amount of movement for this kind of a slow flowing stream. But I think keeping the water transparent on a very thin sort of very shallow river like this worked pretty well, and I think sort of fits the style of the boards as well. So that gives you a sense of an overview of the desert modular river boards. And hopefully you get a sense of some of the detail that I've put into these. And of course, should you come to the web store and you're interested in purchasing a set, but you'd like to see some alterations, color of the soil, the amount of vegetation that's on it, the actual color of the water, any of those kinds of things, of course, can be modified upon request. And when you come to the store, or if you're looking at this video as a link from the store, you may notice that I'm changing the format of how I list things. So this is going to be in a more concise listing, a little bit easier for me, where I'm going to have just the pictures of the individual pieces and then a link to the sort of aggregate photos of all the close-ups. So if you're a viewer on YouTube and you're interested in seeing some close-up photos of these pieces, you can go to the web store at TerranScapes.com. And I hope you keep an eye on the channel, as I'll be coming back as fast as I can render these videos and show you some of the other board types that were in this desert set. So thank you once again for joining me, and keep an eye on the channel, because I will be back soon with another video.